We are going to go ahead and get this joint committee session started. It is such a privilege and honor to look out into the audience and see such a rock star group of community advocates and community leaders who are working diligently on this very important issue, how we support our newly arriving communities. As we begin this very important conversation, I want to take a point of privilege to give everybody a little bit of the background why I requested this joint committee session. I need to give a big shout out to our council president, Nancy Navarro, and my colleagues from the previous council who did outstanding work over the last 8 years, and in particular the last 4, as the county worked hard and diligently to create a stronger safety net for unaccompanied minors that came over in crisis more than 3 years ago. And of course, we are seeing a new wave of families that are coming across as well. And despite the immoral efforts of our president and vitriolic language and terrible economic policy, we are seeing another wave of immigrants, and we've seen a huge spike over the last year. And so those horrific efforts are not only not working, but leading to even more families coming across the border. I did have the opportunity about 2 months ago, along with my friend Antonio Tijerino from the Hispanic Heritage Foundation and some other community advocates, to visit the border in McAllen, Texas, and spent a couple of days there. And what I saw was truly remarkable. I saw a community that was banding together to do their best to support the families that were coming over. We specifically visited Sister Norma's Respite Center, which has been established as a place for families to go after they've been detained and gone through their preliminary asylum hearing. They leave those hearings often with nothing but literally the shirts on their back. And the children who were there, by and large, were in orange T-shirts because those were the shirts given to them. Some of them had digital ankle bracelets, but they had run out of them, and so many of the students and families didn't have them. And while they were there, they got love and support for those 24 hours, but they left there armed with nothing more than a little piece of paper in English telling people which bus they were looking for at the Greyhound station and to please help them find that bus. Coming to our community, coming to communities across the country with the dreams and aspirations of so many immigrant families that have come before and are coming now. And so we as a community have done a lot and have, I think, an incredible infrastructure in place that I'm proud of, that I helped play a role in ensuring that we develop over the last 8 years. But I know that our systems are challenged, and we do have to be honest and diligent about ensuring that we have the right systems in place to get an update on where we are now with the unaccompanied minors that came several years ago and the new wave that we're seeing today with families coming. And so I want to turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Craig Rice, who's the chair of the Education Committee and graciously expressed a willingness to co-host this committee session, to make some opening remarks, and then I'm going to ask my colleague, Council President Nancy Navarro, to make some opening remarks, and then we will get started with the briefing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to be brief. I just want to make sure that we acknowledge your great work as the lead of our Department of Recreation for many years, in which you dealt specifically with many of these children and making sure that we provided them with services that not only were there for them during the school day, but also, more importantly, after the school day ended. And continue to embrace the types of policies, ones in which support all folks in our community, regardless of where they come from, regardless of how much money is in their pockets, and quite frankly, regardless of their citizenship status. If they're in our communities, they are one of us. And so let me be very clear, while we may not hold the status of being a sanctuary city, we are open and welcoming like we have always been throughout the history of Montgomery County. Just as my parents came here to try and find a great life escaping the atrocities that were happening in the Deep South during the Civil Rights era and wanted to establish a better life for their child, their only son. That's the same thing that we see for many parents, and many parents make the difficult decision to send their children alone to try and fend for themselves, understanding how much of a challenge it is to do so, but hoping for a better life for their kids. Those are the people that we're talking about. And so when I see this national conversation in one in which tries to either demonize these folks as trying to take something away from us, let me tell you that by having more people in our community who are trying to make a better way of life for themselves benefits all of us. It contributes to the overall fabric that we call Montgomery County, and it is who we are as humanity. And so I really want to echo the sentiments and thanks for the great work of our County Council President, who's continued to remind us as a young woman who came to this country about what it means, what it feels like, and how we need to do an even better job of taking care of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Rice. Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much, Chairman Albornoz. It just dawned on me how extraordinary it is to be sitting in this joint committee session with all of you. I think it speaks volume for what Montgomery County continues to strive in terms of leadership and in terms of not shying away from having these conversations. Because the truth of the matter is that for so long, there has been a lot of reservation around these conversations. And I never understood that because as county leaders, we have to manage and deal with and step up to the plate in a county that has extraordinary values around inclusion and around tolerance and around understanding that, you know, we really do reflect the country and the world. And so this particular topic, and I would have to say that I've always felt strongly that we really should call this children fleeing violence and not unaccompanied minors. I mean, this is something that we decided a long time ago because that's what it is. These are children fleeing violence. And this is, of course, many of us are so aware of the historical context of what has created these issues and these challenges. Those have not changed. As a matter of fact, they become exacerbated. And, you know, as somebody who came at age 17 to go to college from a country that was one of the strongest democracies in Latin America, one of the countries with strongest economy in Latin America and historically, that now is seeing more than 4 million people fleeing both to South America and very soon I think that we're going to continue to see an influx. As a matter of fact, Venezuelan political asylum petitions are the highest in the United States at this moment. You know, it's always struck a chord with me dealing with these issues of our brothers and sisters from Central America, but now it's personal. Personal understanding that in just a decade or two, a country can go from one of the highest, strongest economies to being an absolute failed state, where people who come here, and we just had a public hearing where a gentleman who was a dentist who ran a very successful dental practice in Margarita Island is here asking for a microloan to see if he can somehow make it do because he had to leave overnight as a political person seeking asylum. This is real. And so for people who come here every day, having lost everything, in such horrible circumstances, we in Montgomery County have always stepped up to the plate. So since the summer of 2014, we have had a series of council briefings on this issue. And the work group of children fleeing violence was an early component that came out of this particular sessions here on the council. We are very proud of the previous executive, now the current executive, HHS and CPS and nonprofit providers for stepping up. We know that the Street Outreach Network, Identity, the Latin American Youth Center have all stepped up as much as they can. We know that Linkages to Learning has always also been a partner, the wellness centers, school-based health centers, 311, we've been using that as a platform as well, and also legal pro bono assistance through the Montgomery County Bar Foundation. I was one of the people that called for a critical response plan that was necessary to establish protocols because we understood that now with this administration in the White House, unfortunately, we have to be ready for deportation raids. You know, MCPS has had to put in place a protocol. I can't believe that we have had to do this. HHS, in case there are children who are left without their parents when they come home. All of that, we have had to put, you know, a plan together. And then we also, in FY16, added almost $300,000 for two nonprofit organizations for interventions that are targeting youth at risk of gang violence. Because to add insult to injury, not only do these children fleeing violence get here, but then gangs think that this is the best way for them to recruit. So we have had to respond to that. In addition, we have included funds for strong families, for Catholic Charities, $175,000. And then finally, and this, unfortunately, the Washington Post got it wrong, there was an article this week about legal defense fund that I think is being considered in Fairfax County. Well, Montgomery County in in 2018 appropriated $370,000 for legal defense for the FY19 to 3 organizations. So this is just really a summary of everything that we have done. But I got to tell you, there is just so much more that we're going to have to do. The current president has now said that he will suspend foreign aid to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. You know, they have decided that it is easy to use immigrants as the scapegoat. You know, we live in a time where it's so I guess it's fun to just simplify and stoke fear at the expense of those who are defenseless. So we know that this is coming. And our healthcare providers are seeing it, and you know, I've pointed this out as well. So I appreciate us having an opportunity to take a step back and really evaluate what we have in place and be proactive in our work. So again, thank you, and thank you to all of you in the audience who work so hard day in and day out. I want to give a specific shout out to Luis Cardona, because he's like the canary in the mine. Yeah. He is constantly saying, look, hermana, this is what's coming your way, and we need to come together and make this work. And he always talks about the trauma that these young people come with and the need for restorative practices around a lot of these issues. And for that, I really want to salute the work that he has done in this county. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. I want to acknowledge Board of Education member Dr. Judy Daca is in the House. Thank you, Judy, for all your work and for being with us today. Councilmember Glass wants to make some opening remarks as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all the comments that everybody made. It's another reason why I appreciate serving with you and love living in this county. And before having this conversation about an hour or so ago, as referenced by the Council President, the other presidents a few miles away took to Twitter to write, quote, due to the fact that Democrats are unwilling to change our very dangerous immigration laws, we are indeed, as reported, giving strong considerations to placing illegal immigrants in sanctuary cities only, Trump tweeted. He went on to write, the radical left always seems to have an open borders, open arms policy, so this should make them very happy. Well, Mr. President, here in Montgomery County, we accept residents and individuals from all places, regardless of where you were born, regardless of the language you speak, and regardless of whom you love. And I look forward to this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the perfect segue, and I appreciate everyone's comments. So the goal of our session today is to get an update on where our county agencies are in terms of the infrastructure that's been established over the last 4 years, what you're seeing today, and what your plans are in the near future, and see what we can do to support those efforts. We also have a rockstar group of community organizers and advocates and leaders who will be in the second panel talking about what they're seeing in the community today. And we're fortunate to have Armando Trull, who has been a leader in this space for many years and has been to the border doing incredible reporting and has a compelling story to share about a recent visit that Council President Navarro and I had the opportunity to hear about recently. So, but I want to start with our county agencies. If we could invite Luis Cardona, Robin Riley, Vicki Buckland. We already have MCPS at the table, and we also have Kaori from the Gilchrist Center. We're going to leave a little bit more time for the second panel because we love you guys, but we have the opportunity to engage more often. And so I request that each of you limit your opening remarks to around 5 minutes or less. And you know, there will certainly be questions. I know our folks in MCPS actually have a slide panel, so if it takes a little bit longer than that, that's fine. And I know that there's been a lot of really great work done, and very interested to hear what you guys have to say. But I did also want to echo Councilmember Navarro's comments regarding Luis Cardona, who I've known for over 20 years now, which is hard to believe, and couldn't agree more with just his diligent work and his support. And I want to acknowledge Ms. Buckland as well, and the leadership at HHS, who's provided the support and the infrastructure and just been doing outstanding work. So we want to start with Dr. Bryce with MCPS. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. On behalf of MCPS, thank you for the opportunity to come and to share how we are supporting all of our students. The first thing that I would like to do is introduce my colleague, Ms. Margarita Borquez, who is the Supervisor of International Admissions and Enrollment in MCPS. And she really is our point person who is working on the ground with parents and children on a daily basis as they enroll in our schools. Very important for us to make the announcement and to continue to make the announcement that all students are welcome at MCPS. We do not ask, nor do we check, nor do we provide any information related to any type of status that they may have. That is not our concern. Our concern is the education of young people. So when they come to us, we are going to work to enroll them, get them into school as quickly as possible so that learning can continue and take place. There are a couple of things that I will just need to address, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Borquez to talk about our enrollment numbers. Number one, we are seeing a spike. We are seeing an increase in overall enrollment through that office, as well as we're starting to see an uptick in the number of young people that are coming to us unaccompanied. And so clearly this is something that we are preparing for, working with our county as well as community partners to address. The other thing that our district is focused on is how we support all students. We will be presenting to our Board of Education on May the 14th what our superintendent has taken to call physical, social, and psychological well-being. It's a framework that has a number of pillars, 6 pillars actually, and chief among them are restorative practices and trauma-informed practices, because we recognize that all students at some time may need the support and encouragement of caring, committed adults in schools, whether they were born here, whether they just came here, or whether they've been here for a number of years. And I think the last thing that what I would mention is our focus on working collaboratively. And so many of the people that are on the panel at this time are folks that we work with and agencies that we work with to make sure that we are hearing information, collecting the information that we need so that we can position ourselves to warmly receive our young people and their parents where possible, and to get them into schools as quickly as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Borquez.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. Just quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the excuse me, some of the procedural changes that have taken place in the office over the last few years. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, the 2014 influx of immigrant students really prompted a lot of the changes that have occurred over the last few years, always with the goal in mind to make enrollment and supports to students and families as easy and as seamless as possible, so that they are integrated into the school community and are starting their studies and are starting to acculturate to Montgomery County and the school system. We have the most important factor for enrollment is whether a family lives in the county or not, and that's the one thing that we have to have the families meet. But we've streamlined the process over the last few years. There was a collaboration, cross-office collaboration work group that met over the course of 2 years to streamline the enrollment process. We met with many offices in MCPS to make sure that we're eliminating hurdles, practices that were in place that made it difficult for families to show documentation. And also acknowledging the digital era that we live in, not requiring hard copies for everything, but also allowing digital copies. Things of that nature have made it easier for the families. The other thing that we've been doing is in the office, we've tried to make the entire process as seamless as possible. Many times the families had to come out a couple of times, 2 or 3 interviews, separate appointments to finish the enrollment process. We were able to shorten that to just 1 appointment, assuming the family has all the documentation they need at the time of the appointment. We're able to do the intake, the testing, and then we incorporated an orientation phase to the entire process where we're able to connect with the school and actually make the appointments to the school for the families. Because before we used to see them and then we used to say, you know, please enroll in the schools, and sometimes that would fall through if they couldn't get through or if they were too nervous or too shy to call the schools and make contact. So we're able to call the schools and make sure that they're seen on the receiving end. We've also been able to identify students who are pregnant, students who have diabetes, students who have epilepsy or other health issues, and we're able to connect with the school nurses so that the students are not sitting in a classroom for months before that's identified. So we've been able to do a lot of those things. So the orientation piece of the process has been critical in helping the families, among other services that we offer. These are the intake totals. These are the total number of families, of students that we've seen over the last 5 years. And these are all the families we see, not just unaccompanied minors, but we're seeing families who are coming from other states who originally came to New York or Texas and now are coming here. And I'd like to point out that we've met last year's total number. We met that in February. So we're already seeing a pretty big uptick that we hadn't seen before since the first one. Okay. These are we were asked to provide number of students by school level, and these are the students that cleared our office for enrollment, and this is how it breaks down: elementary, middle, and high. My office collects languages, and I focused on the top 6. There are many other languages, but they all average less than 100, so I focused on the top 6, and you can see English's number is on there. And a lot of students come from English-speaking countries, so we're seeing a lot of that. But at the bottom, you see Spanish being by far the largest group, Spanish-speaking group. This is what I know we're most interested in. These are the unaccompanied minor students, or the students that come through the Office of Refugee and Resettlement. These are the numbers over the last 5 years. We saw a bit of a decline last year, and now we're seeing an increase. And again, these are the numbers as of April 10th. And they're still, my office is very busy right now. The phones are ringing off the hook. And then this is a little harder to read. I apologize for that. But these are the ESOL enrollment numbers by school. And ESOL, one thing I need to point out is that not all international students that come through the office are flagged or screened for ESOL. And even if they're screened, they may not qualify because their English proficiency level is higher than they need for ESOL services. But these are the enrollment by school level, and there's also a number for special programs. And then ESOL student enrollment by language. We did list the top 10 languages. So you see Japanese, Korean, Russian, Urdu, and Vietnamese on this chart, also Arabic. And again, these are ESOL students, not just the ones that came in this year, but all ESOL students in the county at the moment. And lastly, we're talking about Metz Enrollment. As you may know, the Metz students are ESOL students who have interrupted education. These students have 2 or more years of interruption. And especially with our Central American students, we're seeing a lot of high school age students with only a 2nd grade education, so the gap is pretty severe. And what we're finding is a lot of the students come from towns where there's only an elementary school available. So when they graduate elementary, the secondary school is in towns farther away or cities farther away, and they usually drop out and look to work rather than travel to secondary school. So we see those students and they qualify for Metz services, and they're given additional literacy and numeracy supports when they go to school.
Thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll get a briefing from each of the corresponding county agencies and then ask questions at the end. I've got a few that was enlightening on a lot of different levels. So I want to turn it over to HHS next to give a briefing from your guys' perspective, what you're seeing, what infrastructure we've been able to establish, and what your plans are moving forward.
Sure. As an agency that has a lot underneath it, this particular population intersects with our programs in a lot of different ways. Obviously, we have a lot of programs that are done in conjunction with the schools, and so things like the pregnant teens and stuff like that. That's something that we work on together. Linkages, school health services in general, and mental health services all end up being things that we do in conjunction. In addition to that, we see unaccompanied minors in a number of our other programs that simply enter those programs not necessarily, they're not targeted toward unaccompanied youth, but they end up providing services for a variety of reasons. So, we do see some students who enter child welfare, for example, because they've been caught up in trafficking or other reasons like that, and have been flagged for child welfare services. We have a number of students who, because they have no other means of support, they enter through Care for Kids. That's actually part of what happens with school health services as well, since our school-based health centers also provide primary care for some of the Care for Kids students. We do have a couple of places that do more directly serve this population, where in some respects, part of the point of the program is to, in fact, serve this population. I'm going to let Luis speak for himself because he's very, very good at doing that, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. So I'll ask him to speak for himself. The one other place where we have particularly targeted programming is through the Latino Health Initiative, where we have family reunification services. So part of what happens with some of these students, some of these young people, is that they actually do have family, sometimes extended family, sometimes very immediate family, who is in this country, and they've often been separated for long periods of time. And you've got a new culture, you've now rejoined a family. There may be other kinds of feelings that have come into that picture based on long separations, whether those are feelings of guilt or anger or fear or other things. And then, of course, as was mentioned, the sheer trauma of the experience has its own layer of issues that a family that's reunifying has to work through. So between the programs that Luis has and the family reunification work in the Latino Health Initiative, those are particularly targeted for this population. But obviously we see kids in a whole variety of programs. And in some respects, that's part of the point of us being unified, a unified department, is that when you've had an experience like that, that doesn't show up in just one way. And it allows us to then meet the multiple needs that those particular youth arrive with, because they inevitably do. Luis, do you want to go ahead and speak to your background?
Good afternoon. For the record, Luis Cardona, Administrator for the, Good afternoon. For the record, Luis Cardona, Administrator for the Positive Youth Development Program. In the best interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail about the programs because, as our Council President, Nancy Navarro, already did, she laid out a lot of the strategies that we've put into place. I do want to share a couple of reflections, though. As we know, we have always done our best to respond to them, and we have to acknowledge the leadership of Ike Leggett because he made it really clear. He said, we will welcome these children. So that gave us the charge as a county government to make sure we did everything to maximize all our resources, which was really helpful, the importance of political will to address these issues. Over the last 5 years, it's been really interesting. As some may or may not know, I had 2 trips to El Salvador prior to the surge. I had an additional 2 trips to McAllen, Texas in 2014 and most recently in 2018. And so to some extent, that really helped us to inform a lot of the policies and decisions that we were thinking about, some of the conversations we had with MCPS, with the Recreation Department, our law enforcement entities, and many of our other systems of support. The one thing that I think is really interesting and connected to the numbers that Margarita was presenting to us is that in 2014, we were seeing a surge of children primarily from the Northern Triangle of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. In my most recent visit to McAllen, I saw whole family units primarily from Guatemala of Mayan descent, non-Spanish speakers, primarily speaking the language Mam, right? And as some may or may not know, that's there's like 10 different dialects, if not 16, I think, of that language in itself, which presents some other challenges for us in terms of how to respond. And anecdotally speaking, I know that a lot of my staff, and primarily my frontline staff, had mentioned they've seen a huge increase of Guatemalan kids that we're working with now, although our numbers are relatively slow, and I'll get into that in a minute. So one of the things that I want to take us back to in 2014, Umar Al-Walia had made a statement, was like, well, we know we need to respond to the mental health needs of these populations. However, our systems cannot keep up with the need. That's been a crisis for us forever, right? Even before this surge. And so one of the things that I wanted to acknowledge was the fact that thanks to our partnership with Antonio Tijerino, Councilmember Navarro, we launched this partnership with Imagination Stage to get this play going called Oime that really tells the story of who these children are, their experiences, their trauma. And the reason that was so important is because and again, this disclosure, I'm not a therapist by background. That's not my background. But I will say that in my knowledge of healing-informed practice, before we can even begin to talk about mental health services, we need to start talking about how do we help restore these individuals who have expressed or experienced so much shock. In Latino culture, we call that susto, right? The whole process of when your spirit literally physically leaves the body as a result of the traumatic experience. So hence the efforts of really supporting an effort like Oyeme, because it helps so many of these children and young people to reconnect with that and to be seen in a positive light as opposed to in this darkness, right? The other thing that I think is a little bit different for us now is that in light of this fear-based narrative that we're dealing with in this country right now, especially the threat of public charge, we have seen some significant reductions of young people who are willing to access our services, not because they don't want to, but just out of fear, right? And that's a reality. I think you can see that in some of our numbers in HHS. Then the other piece for us to really reflect on is back in 2016, Diego Uriburu very eloquently laid out a great presentation on a survey they did with over 1,000 youth on adverse childhood experiences. And we always talk about this in that the fact that an average score of a 4.5 and above is bad. But when you have a population with an average score of 7.5, that is very chronic, very serious ACEs scores right there. And so we begin to start thinking about not just in terms of the short term of how we respond to the healing-informed needs, but the long term. How does that play out? what is health and wellness going to look like for this particular segment of the population, and whether we want to get on the, take advantage of the opportunity to invest now or later on where we're talking about more chronic health issues that can be more costly. The other piece that I wanted to mention real quickly is that we've also been very intentional about integrating, even in our positive youth development efforts, the faith-based community. And the reason that we've been very intentional doing that, having traveled down there, local government and very seldom do nonprofits do this kind of work in Central America. They just don't. For the most part, if you're talking about the gang population, it's against the law. You can't even work with them, right? Only the church can do that. And so down there, it's the church, it's the faith-based community, whether it's the Catholic Church, evangelical churches, that do this work. And so when you're talking about a community who's recently arrived, who's still not connected and integrated into our community yet, that's kind of familiar to them. So hence the importance of really being connected with them, right? And I just kind of want to touch on and end on this note, right? That while we have seen some spikes in violence in the past couple of years, it's really clear to us that these children are the victims of gangs and gang violence and not necessarily the perpetrators. And in light of what Councilmember Glass said, I think it's really important for us to understand that, once again, here we are with an opportunity for our county to continue to be a great county, right, in terms of how we respond to this population, and understand that while we give so much to these children and families give us so much more and bring out the greatest qualities. And there's so many people behind me, my colleagues, that I could talk about who I've seen do such great work. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that as a blessing. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to hear back from Margarita in a second to talk about the Unaccompanied Minors Work Group, but why don't we go to Recreation next, and a phenomenal director of Department of Recreation, Ms. Robin Riley.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, it's Robin Riley, Director of Recreation Department. Only to be followed by a really great director. In the essence of time, I'll try to be brief. In terms of us, a lot of the same things that HHS we're seeing in our programs. Our elementary school programs are very full, very robust, high need for after-school care. I would say the one thing that we are seeing a need for and a gap that we're trying to address is a lot of family engagement and parents that are looking for opportunities to take classes in the evening. And childcare becomes an issue for them. So we're working to kind of stretch our dollars and fill some of the gap and have our staff stay a little bit later so a parent or a family member can take a class right after the after-school program. The other thing, and I think everybody would echo this, food insecurities are clearly an issue in the community, and we're seeing it in our out-of-school time and our summer programs. Kids are coming to summer camp without lunches, without food, without snacks. They're asking us if they can take snacks home because there's nothing at home for them when they go home that evening. So, you know, thankfully, MAN has been a great partner with Smart Sacks taking things, helping us, you know, fill that gap, but I think that's going to be a growing need and an area that we have to focus on. And I think Dr. Bryce said it best a little while ago. I think the best part about our staff, we have great career staff, are so committed to this work. We rely very heavily on our seasonal temporaries. And for us, recruiting and maintaining bilingual speakers who can make that committed connection to a young person, it makes the world of difference in engaging that person and keeping them in the safe place and keeping them engaged in either school or our after school. We think of our after school programs as a hook for a kid for school, so that's been a little bit of a challenge for us, is really maintaining that great talent of bilingual speakers to help us with that. We're finding also that our high school programs are starting to see students trying to make choices between employment to help their family members, pay the rent, pay the groceries, or stay after school. And sometimes that's a real challenge, making that decision. And we lose sometimes to that. But thanks to TeenWorks, that sort of helped fill the gap a little bit. And we hope that they can continue to do that and grow. And I think I'll leave the rest of our community members to do such great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Diane and Kaori, update?
Great, thank you. I'm going to leave most of the discussion points to Kaori and the Gilchrist Center, but I just want to give a quick introduction. So in 2014, at the beginning of the humanitarian crisis, our office, under the direction of former County Executive Ike Leggett, led the development of the Children Fleeing Violence and Unaccompanied Minors Workgroup in partnership with MCPS, HHS, and our nonprofit partners. And you'll hear more about that in a second. And once we get our Latino liaison back on board, we will fully support the Children Fleeing Violence Workgroup in the way that our office was supporting it before. And I look forward to having our Latino liaison on board. And as you all know, we're in the hiring process for that. So as you may or may not know, we have been at the forefront of the welcoming work and the immigrant integration work and policies in the county. We've led the Legal Immigration Service Providers Network to build the capacity of our legal service providers to provide legal assistance and legal representation to these youth and their families. We've led the Citizenship Initiative aimed at targeting the 60,000 legal permanent residents who are eligible to naturalize today to start the process. We oversee the Sister Cities program. As you know, our very first sister city was in El Salvador. We oversee the language access resources to the county. And we're part of national coalitions such as the Cities for Action, the Cities for Citizenship, and Welcoming America. And at the center of all of that work has been the Gilchrist Center. And let me just say that Kaori and her staff have been phenomenal. They've been doing this work for quite a while, and that's really where a lot of this expertise lies in. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaori.
Hi, my name is Kaori Hirakawa, manager of the Gilchrist Immigrant Resource Center. So I think I was asked to answer questions about our relationship with MCPS, partnerships with MCPS, so my answers are based on that. So we used to have, we still have a great relationship with International Admissions Office of MCPS. And until 2 years ago, we always, every summer, we had a table at the admissions office in Rocking Horse to have a welcoming table and provide information about services and programs offered by the community and the government agencies. And for some reason, 2 years ago, we stopped doing that, and we'll be happy to come back and then do that again in the summer. That's great. That's great.
We can work that out.
Great.
See what happens when folks are seated at the table together.
And then also we were
exactly.
We were asked by the International Admissions Office to work with them on sending a welcome letter, which is basically a proof of address for those who have issues with getting the to be admitted to MCPS. So we've been doing that. In FY19 so far, we had 76 inquiries on that. And also, we sometimes get a request from PTAs and schools to go and present, and then usually those are the like a coffee session with parents and so on. So we try to do that as much as we can. And in addition to that, 2 years ago we created a quick start guide and translated into 7 languages. And that is a one-stop shop for information that you need to start living in Montgomery County. So we just delivered to International Admissions Office a bunch in multiple languages, and then we're working to create a second version for that. And what else can I tell you? And I echo to many speakers here on this table about the fear. And we see a decrease in number of reaching out to us. And we started getting multiple phone calls asking about usually getting government services. They're so scared of getting benefits from the government, and it's been very hard for many of them.
If you could give us an update on the work group.
Sure. And I look forward to working with the Gilchrist Center and having a table at Rocking Horse. I came on board 2 years ago, so yes, I would love to do that. Montgomery County Public Schools, several offices under Dr. Bryce's direction help coordinate the Children Fleeing Violence Work Group. We meet every month. It's the 4th Thursday of every month. We meet at Rocking Horse. And the collaboration has been wonderful. We have a core group of folks from the community, MCPS, who meet monthly, and we talk about the challenges we're all facing individually with the families that are coming to the county. What are some of the strategies we're using to help these families? How are we making it easier for them to enroll or to get services? And sharing all of these challenges and sharing how we're approaching these challenges has helped us tremendously, and we've learned from each other. Getting feedback from the community about things they're hearing with regards to enrollment, any difficulties the families are expressing have helped us make changes and upgrades to the way we do enrollment at Rocking Horse, and vice versa. So we collaborate regularly. We try to incorporate a lot of the information that's out in the community during the orientation process, and we see ourselves as the first point of contact, and it really the first point of contact for educating the families on the myriad of services that are available, and to try to allay their fears as to telling us what they need and receiving these type of services. And the meetings are very fruitful, and we get different members coming at different times, but I'm always communicating with everyone through the distribution list. Everybody gets meeting notes every month, and I welcome feedback, and I welcome new members all the time.
We've got some lights, so let's turn over to Councilmember Rice, followed by Councilmember Navarro.
So I'm just curious as to what we may view as some of the holes are in terms of what we can do to support our children more. We've heard about the increase in numbers. We've heard about the need for additional services. But let's start tying those, as we're in a budget right now, to where we can actually start answering some of those concerns with real programmatic sorts of solutions. So I'm curious. I know, Ms. Riley, we've already had a conversation with you, so I think we're good there. I know where we need to expand your budget. But I'd like to hear from MCPS as well as Gilchrist. I know that when it comes to school psychologists, the school had looked at adding 3, which we know is still not enough. So I'd like to get a better understanding of what truly is the need, and what do you see as things for the future we can start lining ourselves up for?
Yes, sir. So from an MCPS perspective, fully funding the budget would allow decisions that the Board of Education and the superintendent and myself as a member of his team to implement. So let me give you 2 things just to think about. So what we've heard is that we have an increase in students that are presenting with higher levels of need. So there are 2 ways to address that. You can address it through a programmatic lens, or you can address it as well as through a staffing lens. We think the best combination is both, right? So there are clear programmatic needs that the school system has put forth in our budget that relate to expanding options for young people to participate in rigorous coursework, to participate in programs that help to close gaps that they may present with because they have interrupted education, as well as the need for staffing to provide the type of support and counseling that come from students that are experiencing what we would call Tier 2 or Tier 3 needs, right? So Tier 1 would be sort of the prevention that everyone would get, but we recognize, and Luis mentioned ACEs and the trauma that people, that some of our young people present with. And so that trauma needs to be addressed in the schoolhouse for those particular students by trained clinicians. And so it is paramount that the budget that has been put forth to the best of the county's ability is fully funded.
I'd like to hear from the Gilchrist Center and then from HHS. So.
Okay. So I would like to mention a couple of things. Sorry, my head is kind of spinning right now. And so I am concerned personally that there are a group of population who fall through the crack. So not, somehow they manage to come here, not registered MCPS, just hanging out, right? And then not in the system anywhere. So we need some, support system to those people. And another thing I wanted to say is that I already said that we see decrease in number of clients coming through our doors. And we have 4 locations throughout the county, but maybe we need to start changing our operations in this new reality that we probably have to go to where people are. Because what we are good at, what the Gilchrist Center is good at is building trust. We have been doing this work for many years, since 2001. And why should we, why do we have to wait where we are? Why shouldn't we go out to where people are? And with additional staffing, we could possibly do that. So like going to MCPS International Admissions Office is like a perfect thing for us because there's already a cultivated audience. And it makes our life easier. And it's a win-win situation, right? Because clients can get benefit of our services and expertise. So that's something I wanted to talk to you. And then also stronger collaboration with agencies, like the one we have with MCPS, but also REC, linkages to learning, and HHS, other HHS agencies. We could be mobilized better and do stronger outreach to communities.
Before I turn to Health and Human Services, let me just say that it's very interesting because I actually remember sometime last year around this same time frame to where I was someplace and I saw a mother with 2 young children, and it was around probably 10 o'clock. I don't remember where I was. And I thought to myself, why aren't those children in school? And she was speaking to them in Spanish, and I thought to myself, should I interject? But I don't know if they were sick. I don't know what and so I can't put myself in that position of assuming that I know the reason why. But it speaks to a larger question of, are we truly reaching everyone, and everyone knowing? The second you come here, do you know that MCPS doesn't look at immigration status and know that that's not okay? And when do you learn that? How do you find that out, right? Because there is no automatic guide that comes to your house or your apartment that says, hey, these are all the services that are provided to you. Welcome to Montgomery County, right? And how do people learn about these kinds of things? And so your methodology of taking it to our constituency is one that I know Councilmember Varro's talked about in a number of other entities as well in terms of pushing that. So I think that's a tremendous idea. Mr. Cardona and Ms. Buckland, I know, and Mr. Cardona, first thank you to you for, I was at a Stop the Violence rally that was in Germantown in response to a number of the couple of the shootings that we had in Germantown, and then was at another event in our Germantown Park neighborhood that used to be our Germantown Estates. I'm sorry. It's that used to be our Cinnamon area, and one in which we've been incredibly challenged. And a lot of your folks were there at that community meeting, and so I really appreciate it. Your folks have been engaged and involved in the community, but I know they can't be everywhere. And so from that perspective, I'm very curious, as I always am every budget year, if you have what you need to be successful. And Ms. Buckland, if there's a process with which we can look at and evaluate how we can get into more places, understanding that there continues to be growing need. So I'll turn it over to either one of you can start.
Since they specifically asked when you're going to start, and then I'll wrap up.
So thank you, Councilman Rice. From our perspective, I believe we are where we need to be right now. I mean, we're looking to expand a lot of what the work of the Safe Space, which is our newest pilot, is. We're in the process of interviewing some new candidates for those positions because unfortunately, when we started this past year, some of our part-timers from that program apply for some of our full-time vacancies, right? It happens all the time. And so now we're going full circle on that process. But needless to say, there's a lot of services and a lot of investment that's already been put into our high school-based wellness centers, our linkages to learning programs, Regina Morales' adolescent behavioral health services. And so I would say that the need for strengthening our coordination is a way to start for beginners before we start kind of saying, hey, well, let's put some more money into this. But that's just from my perspective.
Yeah, I think you had made a comment earlier about how do you end up figuring out whether you've reached what percentage of the universe, the total population have you reached? As Luis said earlier, government was not the place you went to for help for a lot of folks. And that's you don't just come into Montgomery County and say, oh, well, no, everything's fine, right? That's not how that works. And so that's why for us, the partnership with MCPS is very valuable because they are more likely to have a larger percentage of that universe than we will get just coming into our door, despite all the work that Luis does and Test Center and Latino Health Initiative. We have a lot of efforts at remaining very connected on a lot of different fronts, but that alone does not guarantee that we'll reach everyone. So those partnerships are valuable. I think one of the biggest challenges for us actually is one of making sure that we have the staff capacity to address issues from the perspective of making sure we have staff that are language capable, culturally competent. I know for in particular, not just in this particular area, but in a number of our programs, finding therapists who have Spanish language capabilities is a real challenge for us. And it shows up in a lot of different places, but this is one of them. And so for us, it's not a question of I need another position per se, but I need to find Spanish language therapists who can fill those positions that I have. So that we can reach as many people as possible. The other thing that I'll mention is that coming into this country, there are a number of different challenges that you have to overcome, and one of them is transportation. So we've made some changes to how we do outreach in some of the schools to have the therapists actually go to schools and things like that. To help make those connections easier so that we don't have people who are trying to navigate the transportation network and the time that takes and all of that. So we've made a few changes to try to reach folks better. But if I could wave my magic wand and get one thing, I would get Spanish language therapists. So
let me just and I just want to close with one thing that I think would be incredibly helpful for our immigrant community, oftentimes of which, unfortunately, tend to be our more socioeconomically impacted, is telemedicine. And I think that, again, because a large portion of our immigrant population still do have cell phones, and so from that perspective, having access to be able to analyze some of those things. So of the impetus of the people who it's harder to get to an appointment, and as a dad of 2 young teenagers, who, from time to time have to take off from work and those kinds of things and drive to school to pick somebody up to do. And it's one of those where, again, the easier we can make it for folks who we know are struggling and spending an hour and a half on ride-on to go to a doctor that may be in Rockville and they live in Germantown. I mean, those are the kinds of things that will make a huge difference
The one thing that I'll say about telemedicine in this particular population, like we have some experience in some of our other programs where maternity partnership, for example, where we were trying to get no-show rates down, for example. And so we were doing some efforts at calling, just, call reminders. There are a lot of folks there who do pay, who save their minutes to call home. And so our experience was that calling them was actually not very successful, but texting was, because that was, that didn't impinge on those minutes that they had saved up. And so my concern about the telemedicine for this population is that you might hit the same barrier, where you end up impinging upon something that they're actually saving intentionally for another purpose. But Luis reminded me, the transportation, like, that's not just therapists. We do that in a lot of places, and Luis's shop in particular, has several vehicles where that's part of the whole point, is that they transport.
We're going to do a quick time check. We've got another panel after this, and I know some of my colleagues have to leave early. And we, by the way, just for context, we squeezed this into the busiest time of year within the council because it's so important. And we definitely want to hear from our community panel. We have questions from Council President Navarro and then followed by Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. I apologize. I have to leave at 3:30. I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I was going to make a quick plug for something on a related subject, just to answer, going back to where the holes are and how do we get to where we are. I mean, if you heard across the board, the answer is resources, right? And when we talk about resources, we have to talk about the upcoming census and the resources that are going to be tied to the census count. And when you talk about hard-to-count communities, this is it at the center of it. So we're really relying on all of our partners at MCPS, HHS, all of our nonprofit partners to really get the word out and encourage folks to respond to the census. And so I just wanted to make that quick plug.
Good,
and let me turn it over to the chair of our census.
Yes.
Very good plug.
There you go.
There you go. So a couple of thoughts. I'd like to request from our staff if we can look at a concept that we had spoken about many times, almost every time we address this issue. Number one, can we create some kind of classification so we can have, just like you have the health promoters, but then have bilingual promoters of some kind, as you were talking in rec, et cetera. I know that we can incorporate that into either our, summer youth workforce employment programs, or just have a cadre of people that could be trained in different subject areas that can then go out and provide some support. I mean, in a county where we have so many Spanish-speaking people, it's bizarre that we're constantly lamenting the fact that we need more bilingual staff. So I'm just interested in seeing how we can be innovative and providing some of that. I also would like to have a some kind of status on our Welcome Back Center. I mean, I opened talking about the issue of all the people that are fleeing Venezuela who are highly educated people who right now, and I just said, I met this guy who was trying to get a microloan. He's a director of a dental practice. He's a dentist. I am sure that we probably have a lot of people that just arrived with degrees. And so what are we doing with the Welcome Back Center in helping these folks fill a major void? I always say, I'm sorry if I sound very impatient, but this is all such deja vu Groundhog Day conversation, and I'm just getting really tired of it. So if we can get an update on that, I'd like to know what we're doing. It is not enough anymore to say and lament that we don't have enough bilingual therapists, we don't have enough bilingual staff, we don't have enough bilingual anything. And by the way, we need to compensate these people appropriately. I have heard time and time again of bilingual therapists who apply and they're like, hey, I'm making so much more money in Fairfax County. And so we need to also look at that and appropriately compensate folks because we have such a need. The other thing I just wanted to ask is just this issue of the upsurge the MCPS is seeing and how that is being addressed vis-a-vis the referrals to all these other programs that we've put in place, like the Wellness Center, Linkages to Learning, or all of that. Are those, are referrals going out in that direction? Are you working very closely with these other partners to make sure that they're able to receive those services that we are funding?
Yeah, two things. Number one, we are seeing an increase in the number of referrals, especially for young people that we're referring to the crisis center. And so the connection that we need to make is, are the students that are being referred, are they the same students, or are we missing a population that is reluctant to either come to staff because they've got concerns or for some reason? So that is something that we can look into, and we would get back to you.
Okay, that would be awesome. I know that the Children Fleeing Violence Crisis Workgroup was created as a result of the many council sessions in 2014, and it's been such a good resource. So I just want to make sure that with this uptick that we're doing that. And lastly, I'm just going to make some comments here on the record. You know, I know that there has been some interest by some organizations and groups, very well-meaning, for Montgomery County to engage in legislation, basically the Trust Act. And I just have to say that it's going to be really important for those of you who are working with these communities to be able to articulate, and some of you have done that today, how scary that is for the very vulnerable people that we have in our communities. It is well-meaning, but Montgomery County has put in place policies where we're very, very careful about how our police department, you know, what they do, how they engage, but really going down the road of legislation, all that will do is put our own most vulnerable people in harm's way. It will put the spotlight on them. And what I hear time and time again is that people just want to send their kids to school, go to work, and they don't want to be in the crosshairs of this extraordinarily toxic environment. So I urge you, if for some reason somebody introduces that legislation, and it won't be me, that you are able to articulate those fears, because they will not be able to do so. But it is, I think, our responsibility to make sure that we constantly work to enhance what we have in place and perhaps amend things in policies, but to really sit there and put ourselves in the middle of this horrible, toxic, you know, conversation and look the other way to what's going to happen to our communities, in my opinion, is very irresponsible. So I just wanted to bring that up and just put it on the record out there, because it's been discussed time and time again. And I think that perhaps for some people don't quite understand the significance and the implications of what this will do to all of those communities who are already not even accessing some of these basic services for fear. Okay, and so we're very close to the epicenter of, you know, the madness right there at the White House. We will be definitely putting folks in harm's way. Dr. Bryce.
Yes, Madam President. The school system operates under a Supreme Court decision, Plyler versus Doe, that requires us not to take into consideration the immigration status of students. So that legislation would not impact MCPS's desire and legal obligation to make sure that we support all students and we enroll all students regardless of immigration status.
That's right, but what it will do is that it will create widespread fear. I attended there was a forum at a church in Gaithersburg when we started seeing an uptick on deportation rates, and it was a Sunday, and the mass was letting out, and there were thousands of people coming out. And then I went to the forum with Chief Manger and a panel, and there were only about 30 people. And somebody lamented and said, how come the folks that were in the mass are not here? And finally somebody got up and said, because they're scared, because they don't want to be seen. They don't want anybody to know their faces and their names. They were not sending their children to school because of the uptick in deportation rates. And so my concern is that this is what will happen inadvertently to many of our people in our communities, and the school system will see, all right, all of these children not being kept home because of the very real concern. So that's, you know, those are just unintended consequences of many of the things that we're dealing with, but I so much appreciate everything that all of you are doing to do everything possible to protect and also to enhance the quality of life of all of us in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much. I'll be mindful of the time. I just have 2 questions. I have a lot more questions because your presentations were very informative, and I'll probably be following up with all of you for a deeper dive. But limiting myself to 2, I'll address this to MCPS, but it might also be HHS as well. Regarding the data of the young people who are coming here and coming into school, the graph regarding showing over time. Is there a system in place that I could only equate to a buddy system, whereas individuals who've been here 1 or 2 years might be paired with new arrivals or anything like that?
Yes, and that's happening at the school level. So there are many schools who, part of their practice in welcoming new students to their schools are partnering their new students with buddies, either from similar proficiency levels or similar countries. It depends on how they pair them up, but I know a lot of schools are engaging in that practice.
Excellent. And you're nodding, Mr. Cardona? No.
Yeah, just real briefly, my experience has been mostly with the Minority Scholars programs. I know at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School a couple years ago, they had a real good pilot in their peer-to-peer support. It was very effective in terms of helping to create a welcoming and nurturing environment for the students.
Absolutely, and that's the goal, and that's why I asked. So I'm heartened to know that these efforts are taking place at the school-by-school level. And the second question, Ms. Buckland and Mr. Cardona, you talked about transportation. And so I'm curious how these youth are getting around to either any of your programs or any of the health care that they need or whatever other activities in their lives they might be engaging in.
So in terms of some of the programs, the Street Outreach Network or the Safe Space implements, we have shuttle vans that can transport up to 15 youth. Granted, it's probably
That the county council added
yes,
funds
of
for.
course, the county council supported. Thank you. And but obviously it's only 13 because
I like the assists. Yeah.
We had to have at least adequate coverage to make sure everyone's safe as well. And that's how our programs operate. I know Diego and others who have programs have transportation that they have available. I know that Regina has been extending her behavioral health services to the school as well. I will tell you though, just to talk about grit and resilience, these young people will figure out ways to get to either work, to school, to soccer programs. I mean, that's happened in the past.
Figured out how to get here. Yeah, for us, we're using 15-passenger vans, but we also partner with the city of Gaithersburg. They have a bus, and Identity helps us with their bus as well.
And so all of those are organizational, operational vehicles. Do we know whether those that are going to school are taking MCPS bus, or if they're taking ride-on or Metro bus or anything like that?
I mean, in general, that's a mix.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
To Councilmember Glass's point, my dream would be if we developed a circulator bus specifically for youth within communities, which would alleviate some of that pressure. I've got 4 years to work on that, and hopefully more beyond it, and I'm going to do that. All right, thank you all very much. Let's bring forward our next panel, which is Armando Trull, representatives from Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington, Diego Riburo, and Elizabeth Lopez. And while this group is transitioning out, I want to give a shout out to Linda and Vivian for doing an outstanding job putting this packet together. It's chock full of statistics and analysis and great back-end stories that really help frame this conversation. So thank both of you for your hard work. Also want to acknowledge my colleague Will Jawando wanted to join us very much on this panel, but was not able to, and it was either today or 3 months from now, so we went with today. But just want to acknowledge that he very much respects all of your work and wishes he could be here this afternoon, but looks forward to partnering with us on this work as well. So I'd like to start now with my good friend, Armando Trull, if you could, Armando, talk about your experiences and provide a little bit of context on why so many families have been coming and why so many families are coming now, and what you anticipate over the next few months based on your professional experience, and I know you're planning on going back to the border soon. And so if you could just talk a little bit about the broader international context, that would be very helpful.
Come from San Antonio, Texas, and along the way, they have found
Sure.
committed clergy like you who are part of a welcoming religious organization or are themselves LGBTQ.
Rewind it. I'll give you the signal.
It's a tease.
Stop it. So first of all, thank you, Chairman Albornoz.
If you could press the button. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chairman Albornoz. Thank you, President Navarro. Thank you, Council Members Rice and Glass, for this opportunity to join such a stellar group of people who, over the years, I have interviewed many times and have seen firsthand the wonderful work that they do. And now that I am no longer a full-time reporter, I can speak as an advocate journalist and really say that I am very, very happy to be on this same panel with them because I do admire their work. I was, as you know, I have been to Central America and the Northern Triangle many times. And what I have seen down there is a violence that targets youth, that targets LGBTQ people, and that now in places like Nicaragua target people with different political opinions. They also target indigenous people in Guatemala, and the cartels and the Maras, of course, target everyone. So that has not changed, and I agree with all of what I heard before, that the numbers are growing, will continue to grow. I would tell you that the numbers this year, I would not be surprised if they surpass the surge of 2014. That is what I believe. And I believe that that is going to be because of several reasons, including the Trump administration. The Trump administration is manufacturing a crisis. The Trump administration, remember a few years ago when we called President Obama the deporter-in-chief and wanted him to change his immigration laws? Well, now we got somebody who is going to change those immigration laws, but they're going to be even worse. And even with the courts stopping what the worst instances of what the Trump administration is doing, we have still seen family separation. We have still seen children that are adrift in the system and lost. He just decapitated the entire leadership at DHS, and he is going to install yes men and yes women who will be more than willing to continue with the illegal practices that he has begun, and even family separation. And so I think it's going to get worse. Ms. Hirakawa mentioned the kids and the people who fall through the cracks and the ones that are not paid attention to, and the importance of meeting them where they are, like Luis Cardona does. There is one group that I would like to highlight, and that is the group of LGBTQ immigrants that no one has spoken about yet, and I think we need to speak about them. Because if there is a vulnerable population within this vulnerable population, the LGBTQ youth are it. The transgender kids are it. They, because of who they are or who they want to be, they are targeted for death. So I have actually a feel-good story about that. I had the opportunity to go with Ruby Corrado, who's a transgender activist in D.C., to San Antonio, Texas about a month ago. What you're seeing is part of a video of a documentary that I'm doing that has not aired. Nobody has seen it, so you get to see it. My good friend at Univision, you cannot use that. But the bottom line is that when Ruby called me to say that she was going to San Antonio to pick up these 15 transgender youth who had been part of the Central American caravan, I went with her. And what was remarkable is that these transgender youth met along the way and decided to band together while they were en route, because together they felt they could have more protection than individually. And when they reached the border, where that Trump-manufactured crisis is still ongoing, and they saw the hundreds and hundreds of people on that bridge, they decided to jump into that water as a group. And when they jumped into that water as a group, some of them couldn't swim, but the ones who did helped them. When they arrived on the U.S. side, they were taken into custody by ICE, but because ICE does not have detention facilities that are appropriate for transgender and gay youth, They don't even have facilities for anybody anymore, but for transgender and LGBTQ youth, it's even worse. They didn't know what to do with them. So they contacted Ruby. And they said, would you take them? Ruby runs homeless shelters in D.C. and Prince George's County for LGBTQ youth. And so that's when she called me and said, I'm heading to San Antonio. And I said, no, we're heading to San Antonio. So over the space of 3 days, we drove from San Antonio to Washington, D.C. with those 15 youth in a van. And we stopped along the way at welcoming churches of LGBTQ pastors and LGBTQ ministers. And this is one clip from one of those stops where the kids were given breakfast, were given clothing, but more than that, they were given love.
Yes.
Is this a new Underground Railroad for these kids?
You know, it's so interesting that you say that. That gives me chills when you say that, because that's exactly what I was thinking last night. You know, this is absolutely an Underground Railroad. And Jazz, one of our individuals who donated, you know, she said something very powerful to me yesterday, a message that she heard at church, and the message was, were you there? And we were there yesterday, and Jazz answered the call, Onyx Keisha answered the call, Lori answered the call. We all answered the call so that we could be here and be a part of this Underground Railroad to get these wonderful, beautiful souls to Washington, D.C., and to really experience the freedom that we have. That's what America is about. This is what America is about.
So that was one of the stops along the way. There were many other churches along the way where we saw this. And then could we play the final clip? And this was at 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday when those kids were welcomed at that shelter by other kids like themselves, by other Central Americans. 4 in the morning. That's Ruby with a prayer. For the first time, welcome to the United States, being who they are, with lipstick, food, and knowing that they would have a roof over their heads, food, immigration, counseling, including free legal advice, and welcomed by other transgender Central Americans who went through the process years ago and were able to tell them. So as you consider your budget and as you consider what you do, I would urge you to consider a program like what Casa Ruby does. I don't work for Casa Ruby. I am here because I believe in my community, both the LGBTQ community and the immigrant community, being an immigrant, being gay, and being a refugee. Think about them because they need support and nobody thinks of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando. Why don't we move on to Catholic Charities next? I know that you guys are doing some really outstanding work with legal immigration services, and I had the opportunity to attend a session at one of our local churches where there was a workshop in place, and I really want to thank your leadership. If you could describe a little bit about the services you're currently providing, but even more importantly, what you're seeing currently, most recently with this wave that we've got now. And if you could please make sure you introduce yourselves and your names. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Rishti. I'm the Director of the Immigration Legal Services. And with me today is Jenny Kachaya. She's the coordinator for our legal orientation program for custodians of unaccompanied minors. And I'll allow everybody else to introduce themselves.
Julieta Machado. I am the Director of Immigrant Support Services.
Karina Navas with Strong Families Initiative, Program Manager.
Thank you very much for having us today and allowing us to participate. I feel that very much we're on the ground with the communities that we're serving. Our program provides direct immigration legal services, so when someone comes up from the border and they need representation in immigration court or representation before USCIS, we can provide that representation. Initially, we provide consultations, and we have walk-in hours throughout the week at our different locations. One thing, of course, that we're seeing is we have generally just at one of our locations in Montgomery County, we have between 25 to 30 individuals that wait online starting at 5 o'clock in the morning on our intake day, and the majority of those individuals often include recently arrived individuals and families and the unaccompanied minors. So most of them have removal proceedings that they need representation in court for. So, of course, Catholic Charities, we have a limited capacity, as do the other nonprofits in the area. So we do our best to provide the services that we can provide through our direct legal representation. We also have a pro bono program, and through the pro bono program, we provide trainings to private attorneys in the DC metro area on different topics, asylum, special immigrant juvenile status, et cetera, so that they can be equipped to take pro bono cases that we refer to them. In addition to that, we do a lot of Know Your Rights presentations, community outreach and education. The event that you were just mentioning was our effort to go to the different parishes throughout the Archdiocese of Washington. There's a lot of well-meaning people that want to do something. We don't necessarily want them to practice unauthorized practice of law. So we do want to take their skills and their areas of expertise and give them ideas on how to support the immigrant community, whether it's by sending pro bono attorneys, interpreters, or just providing accompaniment to these individuals when they go to ICE or to the court, forming a buddy system within the parishes to help them with school enrollment and things that they really need to get done. So that's been a great opportunity. In addition, one of our primary programs is our legal orientation program for custodians of unaccompanied minors, and I'll defer to Jenny to talk about that.
Thank you, Jackie. Again, for the record, my name is Jenny Cachaya with Catholic Charities. I have been working with unaccompanied minors since 2011, and the numbers, as we all know, have been increasing. And I'm surprised because I have not seen or been provided any recent statistics from the department, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which used to release statistics on a quarterly basis. So the last number that we have is the number for 2018. I have many reasons to believe, based on the numbers that we served at our office. As of March 2019, we served approximately 446 unaccompanied minors that have reunified in the area. So not only Montgomery County, but the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And we cannot serve 100% of those minors. So the numbers, this is a record number that we have served since 2011, and for that particular month. And our expectation is that the numbers are going to be higher than 2014, when we saw about 59,000. So we are trying to do the best we can. And as Jackie mentioned, so the other part of the component that we do with serving the immigrant community, we have seen a lot of family units arrive, and our lack of capacity and limited resources we can tell that we don't have the capacity to serve. So people lined up at 2, 3 in the morning at our offices in Silver Spring. We have a security guard to enable or help with there is a line, there is a list that forms, and all that is done, with the people that have been there since, trying to get a spot in line since like maybe the week before they were turned away. So a couple of, one specific need that I see there is we do not have the legal capacity to, or have an attorney for every single one of those individuals or families. However, we try to assist in the need for bilingual volunteers that can help with their, so these families can meet the 1-year filing deadline for asylum. Is critical. So we know that we cannot place them with an attorney that is low cost or free, but we want them to be able to pursue their asylum cases, and at the very least, we're facilitating through volunteers that are bilingual the opportunity for them to meet that 1-year filing. So that's how we prioritize the families that we serve, but it's, the need is critical. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, through our social services programs, we're helping these families in attaining employment, receiving case management, taking care of their food needs and other needs that they may have, housing. That has been a big challenge, as you can imagine. We're also offering training. We have an ESOL program. All these families are coming through our ESOL program and learning English. It's a program based in Gaithersburg, and the numbers are increasing, and it's a very strong program. Addressing the question from Mrs. Navarro that unfortunately left, we're addressing the need for training of those refugees that are also coming with higher education and that need to learn English and also be trained and get a certification here in the U.S. We have a bank teller program that runs 4 times a year. We have a green pre-apprenticeship construction program. We are offering a hospitality program in partnership with another organization in D.C. Through those programs, our students are being able to get into employments and follow a career, not only just getting a job, but also following a career path in those sectors. I forgot to mention that we also have an employment program, job readiness program, that helps them into understanding the culture of work, understanding the culture here in the U.S., and getting all the paperwork ready, all the resume, and getting ready for an interview in order to apply. We're also inviting employers to come to our centers, both in Gaithersburg and in Wheaton and in D.C. We're inviting them to come and meet these clients directly and interview them and possibly hire them. So we're doing a lot, but sometimes there's little that we can do since these families some of them are not eligible for many benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Karina Navas with Strong Families Initiative. We currently have groups in 3 different locations, one at Misión San Andrés, which is in the Glenmont metro area. We have had 5 groups in total since the beginning of the fiscal year 2019, and 5 groups in St. Camillus, which is closer to the Langley Park area, and then currently at a middle school with an ESOL group, holding groups there. And as of May 15th, opening up another group at St. Catherine Labouré, trying to hit certain target areas that are, as we know, just high in the target population. So we hold youth groups there, and we just started the parent groups as of January because of training the volunteers. So at the moment, it's just me and a part-time employee, and it's been amazingly difficult. It's been great. I love it. But it's been very hard to obviously communicate with the parents, text them constantly, hey, bring your kids to group, buying the food, bringing the materials for the volunteers. But this program would not be possible without the volunteers. We have a total of 11 amazing volunteers that are helping me assist the group. I like control, so I like being everywhere and being in the groups too, to make sure that the volunteers are dynamic and that the kids are engaged. So it's been really great being with them, and we've had a total of 91 kids, but it's been a mixture. Out of the 91 kids, 22 of them were considered unaccompanied minors, so it is a mixture. And yeah, excited to keep growing. And the roundtable discussion that you went to, I think it was in Gaithersburg, was it that one at St. Rose of Lima?
Yep.
That was my second one attending, and the purpose is also to plant the seeds to other parishes, other churches, to let them know, hey, you can do this too. You don't need Montgomery County. You don't need me to do this. There's plenty of youth curriculum out there that you can implement that's very trauma-informed. And yes, there are going to be volunteers. They're not going to be therapists, but still, it's providing that safe space for kids so they can just release, talk about identity, know how much culture and embracing your roots are, while also learning really important themes to help them transition into being adults, because we all need to talk about those themes that we were too scared to talk about our parents with. So that's what that space is for.
Thank you. Diego.
Thank you. Diego Uriburu with Identity. We continue to see an uptick of clients. So we saw tremendous growth from FY17 to 18 and from 18 to 19. The growth is not as, and there's a presentation that I have. I apologize to the rest. I just have it in paper. So an uptick from FY17 to 18 and a small uptick from FY18 to 19. I also want to remind, Luis mentioned before the study that we did on ACEs, on children fleeing violence, and I just brought one slide from that presentation where we compare the national average for ACEs with the identity clients who are born in the United States with the unaccompanied minors. So at the national survey done by the CDC, 54% of young people claim not having any adverse childhood experiences. The identity universe, only 7% claim not having any adverse childhood experiences. With the children fleeing violence, is 2%. On the other side of the spectrum, when someone says that they have 3 or more adverse ACEs, then that begins to impact them not only in a psychological level, but also on a physiological level. So the national average, 11% of the surveyed by the CDC had 3 or more ACEs. The identity universe was 28%, and with the children fleeing violence was 53%. The next slide, the next page is about our family strengthening program, and you can see the numbers and the evaluation. Thus far, we've done 73 families. You see the evaluation results are great, but I want to share with you some other things that we're seeing. The average age of the children fleeing violence that we're seeing is between 14 and 15. That's the average. We are seeing more girls than before. That's new. While we have not had a decrease in number of children fleeing violence accessing services, and that applies to them plus to many other members of our client population, there's tremendous amount of reluctance to access services, be it healthcare, food, etc. So we have to work double to serve the same amount of individuals because people are really, really afraid. While the needs of, I think that Montgomery County has outstanding programs, but it still lacks, from my perspective, a strategy to best serve the needs of young people who have endured trauma. That could be U.S. born, African Americans, Latinos, and immigrants as well. And then this gets compounded by these young people who are fleeing violence, and then other young people who are fleeing violence from other areas in the world. So I don't believe we have outstanding programs, but we don't have a strategy. And where I really think that the strategy and the programs are lacking are within MCPS. When we track the data, it's not just about when we look at your document, we track the data of young people who have been here for less than a year, less than 3 or 5. So these young people have been coming to the system for years now. And we have not, within the school system, we have not been able to adequately respond to their needs. I don't think we track them. We don't know exactly where they are. And programs are really lacking. I really hope, I spoke with the superintendent, and I applaud Dr. Bryce's effort. They're going to come up with a platform, but we need to, as we testified with the school board, we need to move from platform to action because this crisis has been, when I say crisis, I'm not just talking about children fleeing violence. I'm talking about regular black and brown young people and others who have been living in the county for a long time who are also experiencing tremendous level of ACEs. Special things that we see, particularly the children fleeing violence, the dropout rate is it's incredible. So we need to do something to stop that from happening. The dropout rate with the ESOL population in general is in the 40+%. So some things need to happen in order to do that. Another thing that's really concerning us lately is the level of anti-immigrant, anti-black, brown sentiment that's occurring within MCPS, particularly some of the more wealthy schools, when some of the most diverse schools go to play sports. No, it happens in baseball and other sports. Recently, a Latino person a Latino boy who was part of an up-county school, who was part of the baseball team, went there, and I apologize, I don't know baseball very well, so I don't know if he was hitting the ball or throwing the ball, but while he was there, people began to say, immigrant go home, illegal go home, in front of himself and the families. The school did not do anything to stop that from happening. So the mother and the family and these young people are in disarray right now emotionally. So what I'm trying to say is that there's an uptick in this, and I think that we need to do something to educate, because I don't think that the young people who are saying those words were being racist because they are racist, but I'm not sure that we are as culturally competent as we should be, and being bombarded every day by messages from our president and others. I think that we need to redouble efforts to educate our young people about what it means to be civil, to be understanding, etc. So my main point today is really, I would urge the council to really force us to come up with strategies. There are excellent programs that exist, but those programs are not part of a strategy to address, again, the needs of the children fleeing violence and the needs of many others who've been here for a long time, to whom we have not yet really responded to their needs. We might not be able to fund this strategy 100%, but at least we will know that there's a north, and we can slowly begin to build towards that. Lastly, I spent many hours at the Board of Education budget hearings, and I heard when different groups were asking for 2 more therapists or 5 more counselors here, and the ratio should be 225 or 250. You tell me what it was, the ratio, and they wanted to bring it down from 4 something to 250, and this board seemed to me did not have the school the funds to really bring things to that ratio. So the answer cannot be just adding therapists, which I fully support, but we need to think about systemic ways in order to address the needs of this vast majority of young people, children fleeing violence, and others who need support. So I believe that I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but I think that that is one way for the most extreme cases, but many others would benefit enormously from one trusting adult with whom they can have a good relationship with, and a culturally competent and very inviting environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Ms. Lopez.
Thank you so much for inviting us to speak on behalf of KIND. So KIND is a national organization. Our mission is to ensure that no child faces immigration court alone, and we achieve that through providing these children with high-quality, free legal services. I'm a member of our legal services team. KIND has 3 major components: the legal services team, the policy advocacy and communications team, and our regional team. Our PAC team oversees legislation and policy that impact unaccompanied children and seeks to maintain those protections and advance them. Our liaisons in Congress, essentially. Our regional team is working on the ground as well as domestically to address the push factors that bring the children here in the first place, as well as working with partners back in their home countries in the cases where children don't have viable forms of relief, must return. What are they returning to? So we seek to provide that connection and a safe place for these children to land, for those that do have to return. We have 10 offices nationally. The Baltimore office covers all of Maryland, so we are the office tasked with supporting the youth here in Montgomery County. our staff is, has mixed funding, and we have a hybrid model, much like Catholic Charities, of both in-house direct representation and a pro bono mentoring model, where we train and mentor members of the private bar to deliver these legal services for children. A little more about the work in our office. About 20% of our current caseload comes from Montgomery County, about 95 youth out of almost 500 cases that we have. The next two highest counties, which I think was reflected in the materials for today, are Prince George's County and the greater Baltimore City area. These are both receiving sites, and so therefore you're going to see that similar pattern of mapping. Those are the highest concentrations. I know that you well know that KIND has been a two-time, and I believe we will be a third-time recipient of a community grant from the Montgomery County Council, as well as one of the 3 organizations who received Legal Defense Fund monies. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the work that we do with those monies. I mentioned that we provide representation to unaccompanied youth. We also provide limited representation to their sponsors for purposes of pursuing special immigrant juvenile status relief, the first part of which happens in the state courts. And so to that end, we represent these children and or their sponsors in state court, in immigration court, and before federal agencies in pursuit of that final form of relief. And we do that through that hybrid model. So a little bit of an update on the work we've been able to do under our community grant awards, and then under the legal defense grant. And there's, I think, something particularly notable, which is consistent with the need, which is underscored, I think, by the legal defense grant. So under our community grant award, you know, we've already this contract began mid-September. We've already successfully placed 16 youth cases pro bono and provided that representation. We've delivered 3 Know Your Rights presentations in the community, actually through partnership with Identity and at its high schools, and educated nearly 40 members of the community on forms of legal status. We regularly deliver a robust offering of attorney trainings. So far, we've delivered 5 under this contract year, and we provide new and ongoing representation to 17 sponsors in state court matters. Under the new Legal Defense Fund, which we are so grateful and so excited to have been able to bring on a new full-time attorney with that funding, under the contract, which began in mid-December, and the hiring of that attorney, which happened mid-January, we have screened 18 unaccompanied youth to date and successfully placed 5 of these cases. We already have 44 referrals in that pipeline. We're expecting to potentially receive an additional 20 referrals through an intake clinic planned at the end of the month with Identity, and we have a number of other referrals in the wings. All that to say that our contractual goal of providing representation to 60 unaccompanied youth, in preparation for today, I told my staff we need to start a wait list. That's 3 months in. So I think it really underscored for me coming in here, and I pass that on to you, of the overwhelming need. We're only 3 months with an open door, and we're kind of now at a 1 in, 1 out model, under that contract, under that expanded funding. So wanted to share that, and we're only just now, because of the funding we've got and the word we've put out in the community, we've just started to make new connections. Office of the County Attorney for Children in SINA proceedings. That's a potential source, a stream of referrals. We would love to partner there. And again, the staffing and the funding to do so. So we just started conversations with the Office of the County Attorney representing Child Welfare Services, as well as early contacts with Bethany Christian Services, which shelters immigrant youth. And in fact, they were one of the local receiving sites of the separated children last summer, last fall, which again is only to say that, are they being connected? Are the children that are being processed locally through Bethany Christian Services being connected with legal referrals that are available to take clients? So a great need. Legal challenges, so certainly access to quality, free, or affordable services. I mean, that's the biggest need that there is, as I can provide from a legal perspective. An increasingly hostile legal landscape, and I wanted to, in a moment, walk you through some of those based on some reports that KIND has recently issued. I also wanted to take a moment to mention backlogs. There are extreme backlogs in the immigration system, particularly in the forms of relief that youth are most likely to be eligible for and pursue: special immigrant juvenile status and asylum. For asylum in times past, unaccompanied youth sort of had a preference in terms of scheduling, a more rapidity in which an asylum interview would have been scheduled in recognition that those cases were special and needed to be decided. That model has changed under the current administration in theory, an effort to decrease the backlog. The last case so the most recent case filed in theory should be scheduled first, therefore, of course, creating an intense backlog for anybody that has already been filed. The result, though, the practical impact of that has been that we have not been scheduled for a new asylum interview in about a year. We've filed many asylum applications with the asylum office in Arlington over the past year and have not been scheduled yet for an interview. So, questions when we will get to present those cases. Similarly with SIJS, adjudication periods are extending past the expected times. It's taking well over 18 months to receive a decision on a petition for a special immigrant juvenile visa after state court orders are obtained. So the point only to say that period of uncertainty, that period of continued need for legal representation and providing that continuity, and the risk of things that happen in the interim, whether it's being victims of crimes, getting caught up with law enforcement, then that needs to be addressed as well. So until we get kids to the finish line, it's never really over. And so that finish line just feels like it's getting pushed further back. We do have a social services coordinator in-house who provides referrals and so works in partnership with many of the organizations and agencies in various counties throughout Maryland to connect our clients. We are seeing the same manifestations of higher levels of trauma, distrust, difficulty scheduling initial intakes, which was not a trouble that we had faced in the past, increasing mental health needs. All that I won't go into because it's consistent. Speaking of, again, now bringing it to situation at the U.S. border, which has been hit on, and I think that's well understood here in this group, as well as new legal challenges. I'll just sort of walk through those using some reports that KIND has put out in the last 8 months, which are available in full on our website as my guide. In December, KIND's regional team put out a report called the Protection Gauntlet, and this was based on a week spent in Tijuana. And the situation there with folks stuck right on the other side of the border and unable to come in. And just to explain that, so what they found was that unaccompanied minors are living in a variety of places in a Mexican government-run refugee camp, on the streets, in informal camps along the border wall, and as well as private and state-run shelters. They're living in terrible conditions, squalid conditions, in grave danger, fearful, and suffering with no running water, irregular access to food, dangerous and unsanitary conditions, sleeping outside, so exposed to those elements and the health consequences that come from that, inadequate access to medical care, children turning to prostitution for survival, exploitation and abuse of children following false promises of protection from those that they meet while stuck on that side of the border, and children fearful and distrustful of accepting help from trusted places. Unaccompanied minors are being systemically prevented from applying for protection in the United States, which is a violation of both U.S. and international law. The U.S. government officials are turning minors away. The Mexican government is blocking them from reaching the border. They are either sending them, or from the port of entry, they're either sending them back to the streets or handing them over to Mexican child welfare officials who give them two options: apply for asylum in Mexico or be sent home. let me see, I was going to go into the way that the system is organized, which is really not a system, where I'm sure you've read that migrants are basically maintaining their own unofficial wait list. So that's happening. UICs are being ordered to sign forms indicating they have no fear of return, and they are being forced to enter through informal, not through formal ports of entry, feeling that they have no other option. And the accuracy of information being shared is ad hoc and varies widely depending on who they come in contact with.
So Ms. Lopez, we have about 10 minutes left, and I think that you've done an outstanding job talking about some of the challenges that are at the border that are directly impacting. If you could end with a headline or two, just anything you want to leave us with before we do a brief Q&A, that would be great. And I want to follow up directly with you to meet with you to talk about some of those specific legal services, as I want to follow up with all of the members of this distinguished panel. But if you could give one or two final headlines before we go into a brief Q&A.
No, thank you for that. It's hard to sort of pick one, although I did not get to go into them. The challenges of the evolving legal landscape, the administration continues focused on rolling back protections for these youth, de-designating their UAC status, putting forward presidential decisions through the Attorney General's office that makes avenues towards, asylum relief more difficult. I know this is secondary, truly, to the trauma and the challenges being faced by the population, but I will say it is traumatic for service providers living through that, having lived through family separation last summer. That was a point I wanted to address, and again, there's information on that. Family separation continues in smaller numbers, but it is continuing, and there are not guidelines in place on when or why this is happening. Parents do not have formal process to appeal, to challenge those determinations, and we all know that there is no appropriate tracking system when this happens. So that continues a concern. Kind continues to play a role on the border, and keep an eye on those developments and support those families. And I would just underscore the tremendous need and thank the council for the support that it has in given us in allowing us to even meet this new number of children. So thank you for that.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Rice.
So I'm going to be very brief, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I would like to see, and unfortunately Mr. Rice has left, but I really want to follow up with this, and I'm happy that Vicky's still here from HHS, because I heard from Catholic Charities doing the right thing and being that kind voice and that person that's there to help and support. But we've done a great job of training a lot of our staff when it comes to trauma-informed and giving them some of the mental health triage. I'm very concerned about the mental health of our youth as a whole. And so the more that all folks in our community have that training and ability to be able to start that triage, understanding that then in some cases we'll need to refer to professionals. But Diego, you're right on top of it in terms of that. Yeah, I mean, the psychologists in the school are great, but the reality is that we need, our need is so much larger than that, because it's more than just our accompanied minors. In fact, in a lot of those cases with our accompanied minors, it's more serious situations that are even, as you said, you have all these different kinds of dynamics that are there. Separation from family, the fear of being deported, the fear of the gangs here, finding out that you're here and coming after you, and then the, not knowing what tomorrow's going to hold in terms of stability and all these kinds of things. And you have folks here that are also experiencing trauma and living in trauma, right? So it's the fleeing violence and fleeing trauma, and it's the living in violence and trauma that happens right here in Montgomery County. Let's not pretend that we don't have communities that have the same sorts of unfortunate circumstances and situations that we see in a lot of areas that are highly publicized about those kinds of things, right? So from that perspective, I just think that the more we can do in partnering together, bringing together HHS, bringing together folks in the nonprofit community and our faith institutions that are doing this work on their own, in their own silos that aren't getting assistance from us, we need to provide resources to them to make sure that they have all of those resources as well at their fingertips to help along those lines. So that's just my comment.
I appreciate that. I'll end with just a couple of comments myself. I can't thank all of you enough for doing this work. I know how emotionally draining this is and how overwhelming all of us feel at the moment, knowing that we're already tired, and yet there's another wave that will be coming very soon. And so, to Diego's point, this strategic system-building approach has to be where we go next. There are great individual programs and services, and I'd put up what we do in Montgomery County against any jurisdiction in the country, but we can be better. And so one of the initiatives that we announced at a public hearing just the other night, that my office, working collaboratively with my colleagues on the council and with County Executive Elrich, will be initiating, is a comprehensive New Americans initiatives that goes beyond what we've already done, that really does provide the most streamlined referral service, strategic direction, and ensuring that our families have the easiest time possible in immersing in our communities, and that while they're here, we provide them with every level of support we possibly can, and hopefully through work with our legal services, we keep them here because they have every right to be here. We want them here, and as Luis said so eloquently, he's absolutely right, these communities give a heck of a lot more than they take. Right. And so this laid a great foundation, and there will be certainly elements to this that I think will appear as we discuss the budgeting process over the next 2 months. That summit-like approach to a strategic development we hope to carry out in the fall, and we will be reaching out to all of you because I envision all of you playing an important role in the production of that event, and then a strategic plan that would follow it. And then what I would hope happens is the development of a county executive level board or commission that would be responsible for ensuring the coordination of these services, because it is very spread out, and there were many other organizations that could have been part of this conversation. And an important component to this has to be workforce development, so that we provide sustainable workforce development opportunities for our children, youth, and families. So I can't thank you all enough, and we look forward to the ongoing conversation. Muchas gracias.